Hi, this is Pastor Jay Stillinger from Abounding Grace Christian Church, and this is our fourth lesson in our series entitled Foundations for Defending the Faith. In our last lesson, we began introducing you to three compelling arguments for the existence of God. Those three compelling arguments are what we're going to continue on today. We're going to get into the second one that we dealt with last time. This is part two in these arguments for the existence of God. Last time we were together, we talked about the argument for the beginning of the universe, or the cosmological argument. We established the fact that there is really no question through 5 lines of scientific evidence that the universe did indeed have a beginning, which does imply that there was a beginner. As mentioned before, the scientists at one time took great comfort in the idea that the universe was eternal. It had no beginning, but it has now been proven without any doubt really that the universe had a beginning, and we talked about that and showed you some things. And so this being a rational argument for the existence of God is not based on anything other than what we see around us. Natural theology. It's not based on biblical support or scripture. It's based on what nature shows us, and the evidence that we see from nature points to a creator. It points to an intelligent mind that put this all into motion, and that certainly is implied by this idea of the universe having a beginning, and we dealt with that with the cosmological argument. Keep in mind that all of these arguments, and there's more than just 3, but we're dealing with 3 compelling ones, the most compelling, I believe. But keep in mind that there's more that could be said about all of these, but this is a basic series. This just gets us introduced to some of these ideas. The argument we're going to deal with today is called the teleological argument, or the argument for design. And we're going to expound on that, I believe, to a certain extent, again, remembering that there's a lot more that could be said. And then the last compelling argument that we're going to deal with is the moral argument, and that will be in next time's lesson, lesson 5. We'll deal with that, and that is a very strong argument, very powerful argument as well. And so we've already mentioned to you the cosmological argument. Just by review, remember that the logical form of the cosmological argument, the logical form goes like this: everything that begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, I didn't mention this last time, but sometimes atheists say, well, then what's the cause of God? Which is a nonsense question, really, because God is eternal. God does not have a beginning. Remember, the argument is whatever begins to exist has a cause. God did not begin to exist. And then they argue, well, everything has to have had some sort of beginning, but they didn't believe that when they believed the universe didn't have a beginning. And so why can't they believe that God had no beginning? And so their arguments do not hold a whole lot of weight. And so, as mentioned, we're going to deal with the teleological argument today and show you some amazing things. This is a very, very strong argument, and we cannot even do it justice in this little bit of time we're going to share with you. But the logical form of this argument goes like this. It states every design has a designer. The universe has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a designer. I'll just say it again. You can see it on the screen. Every design has a designer. The universe has a highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a designer. One of the most classic examples of this was from William Paley, who gave the description of a watch. And he basically pointed out that if you found this watch, as you see here, if you found this watch in the woods, would you think it was made by natural law? Or would you think, due to the design that we see in this watch, that it must have had a designer? There must have been a watchmaker. And of course, logic tells us, rational thinking tells us that if we see something with design, there must be a designer. Now, this comes down to, as we deal with the teleological argument or the argument for design, it comes down to this: 2 fundamental origin questions. 2 fundamental origin questions concerning to what caused, number 1, the universe, and what caused, number 2, life. And we're going to look at the complexity, we're going to look at the design a little bit of both the universe and life itself on earth. So we're going to go from the vastness of the universe to some extent to some of the minute detail of even a single cell, and see design in both of those aspects that, again, point to a designer for anyone that is going to be unbiased in their thinking. And so let's start off here with the universe and see some things pertaining to that. And in order to do so, first we need to ask the question, what is science? Because we're dealing with science here. Just like last time with the cosmological argument, we dealt with this from 5 lines of scientific evidence. Well, what exactly is science? Science really is a search for causes. It is a search to find out the cause of things. We do that by experimentation, observation, etc., and we determine the cause the best way we know how. Now, if someone were to ask you the question, and they showed you this picture of the Grand Canyon, what would we say the cause of that was? I think a lot of people would say, well, it was caused by natural forces, wind, rain, heat, perhaps. A variety of things may have caused this Grand Canyon, this structure, this beautiful scene that we see here. But then if someone were to show you Mount Rushmore, would you come to the same conclusion? Do you think that wind, rain, perhaps time, is what caused Mount Rushmore to be formed in this sense? Absolutely not. What we have here is we have 2 types of causes. We have Mount Rushmore, which is an intelligent cause, and then we could say Grand Canyon, which is a natural cause. And so again, we see design with Mount Rushmore. We see definite design. We see the forms of human faces, 4 presidents, former presidents of the United States, and so we see that there was intelligence behind that. I don't think there's any question about that. All right, so as we look at some of these things, we come to this principle, which really is a big part of the teleological argument. And don't get all concerned about that word teleological. It comes from a Greek word telos, which means design. And so again, we're talking about the argument for design. And so with this anthropic principle, this has to do basically with the idea that there's evidence due to the way the universe is made up and everything else pertaining to creation that it was made with man in mind. Anthropic has the idea, comes from the Greek word of human or man. And so it had man in mind. Everything we see in design, there's purpose. We see purpose in design. In fact, we could say this anthropic principle is referring to the mounting evidence that the universe has been fine-tuned or designed to support human life here on earth. I'm going to give you some examples of this fine-tuning that just shows the incredible amount of ideas and purpose and really the incredible tweaking really we can see in the universe and even on planet Earth for the sustaining of human life. Absolutely incredible. And in fact, again, we go back to Stephen Hawking. Some of you remember maybe from the last lesson we referred to him, an atheistic but yet brilliant man, scientist. He said that there was extreme precision at the beginning, and he said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. And so again, it was perfect in order for it to continue to expand and to develop into galaxies. Let me give you some other ideas of how it's finely tuned to support life, the universe and Earth itself. In short, we could say someone knew human beings were coming. Someone knew man was on his way and therefore designed the universe for mankind to have life, to sustain life on planet Earth. Notice, oxygen currently makes up 21% of the atmosphere. We're at 25%. Fires would erupt everywhere, and if it were 15%, humans would suffocate. Perfect precision level of oxygen on planet Earth. If gravity was altered by that number percent, and I'm not going to try to even say that number, the sun would not exist and the moon would crash into the Earth. Further, if the centrifugal force of planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun. In other words, even gravity is at the perfect level in order to sustain life on planet Earth. Also, if the universe was expanding at a rate 1/millionth more slowly than it is, the temperature on Earth would be 10,000 degrees. Precision. We're talking about fine-tuning in the universe, all having to do with this teleological or design argument for the existence of God. More examples of this, and there's many. In fact, Frank Turek and Norman Geisler said in their book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, there's upwards of around 100 fine-tuning, precision type examples of how the universe and planet Earth are made or designed in order to sustain human life. And it seems that there's more and more of these that are coming up, that people are discovering, scientists are discovering more and more fine-tuning design aspects of the universe and planet Earth to sustain human life. It's absolutely, as I mentioned, incredible. Notice some other examples. If the thickness of the Earth's crust was greater, too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life. And if it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make life impossible. The axis of the Earth, next, the axis of the Earth is set so carefully that if it were altered even so slightly, surface temperatures of the Earth would be far too great. Another one, if water vapor levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are right now, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise far too high on the planet. Life would die out, and if they were less, an insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support life. And again, we could go on and on. I'm going to give you some examples in terms of planetary issues and some of the way the planets are arranged and how this all works. Notice this. If Jupiter was not exactly where it is, Earth would be bombarded by space material that would threaten all life on the planet. As you look at this picture here, you notice, and you probably know this, that Earth is the third rock from the sun. And so you'll see planet Earth there, the third from the sun, and then the fifth from the sun is Jupiter. And so if Jupiter was not placed right where it is, we would be bombarded by meteors, by space material, as this states. And notice this is Jupiter. This is the surface of Jupiter. And you'll notice that these dark plumes on Jupiter are caused by comet fragment strikes, and each of those are bigger than planet Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. God created it and put it in place in order to protect planet Earth. And so even the universe around us, I think it's very safe to say, was made in such a way, arranged in such a way as to support life on planet Earth. As far as even the distance of the sun, all these things, the moon, all of that affects life on planet Earth. Again, design and purposeness, absolutely very clearly seen in all of this, all right, that there is a purpose to all that we see in creation. And so more things pertaining to the anthropic principle. The average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, That distance is needed for Earth to exist in its present life-supporting position. And so in order for it to be life-supporting again, the stars and the distance between them has to be just like that. And so there's only three possibilities of this fine-tuning or this design, this precision that we see. And this is the surface of the sun, by the way, in that picture. There's only three possibilities as I would see it. Number one, it all just happened by chance. All just happened by chance. If you believe that, then you have a lot of faith. I don't have enough faith to believe that these things in their preciseness could possibly be just by chance. Secondly, physical necessity. In other words, it just happened as some kind of form of nature needing it to happen that way. And so it was just physical necessity, and so everything adapted for life to be supported. Or thirdly, and I think that I would go with this, and I hope that you would as well, there was intelligent design behind all of the precision that we see in this fine-tuning. And so, those are the only three possibilities. And again, I don't know. I think it takes a whole lot more faith to believe the first two possibilities than it does the last one. And so you be the judge and you determine that for yourself and think about that. The Bible says the heavens reveal God to us. The Bible makes that very clear in Psalm 19 and verse 1. It says the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. And then we mentioned last time, Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So in other words, what do we see? We see that the invisible qualities of God are seen, or the invisible attributes of God are seen by that which is made. By those things, including the design that we see around us in the universe and in all the things we see on the earth, we see that there is there's a great sign or evidence that God does exist. In fact, I remember reading one time that Charles Darwin, who most of you I'm sure are familiar with, he made the statement that when he would would see the feathers of a peacock and the design on those peacock feathers, it would make him sick. Why? Because he knew that the design on the feathers of a peacock's tail was evidence of a designer. I think that he also said something about the intricacies of the human eye alone show such design that, he was just irritated by that idea that there was design, implying again a designer. And so, we said again, as we mentioned before, two fundamental origin questions, and they are what caused the universe, and now we want to talk about what caused life on planet Earth. And here we have a picture of a simple cell, if you will. Many people say it's simple. It's not so simple. It's actually very complex. In fact, when Darwin was around, he had the idea of simple cells, and science has advanced so much, they've realized that even what was once called a simple cell is actually a very complex cell. And so that has been kind of something that has really put into question the whole idea of much of Darwinian evolution as well. Now, with a simple cell, if you will, or a single cell amoeba, we have to understand that there's much complexity, and we have to understand that there are things that we need to see with this concerning DNA. We're going to look at DNA to a certain extent because DNA is an important discovery for us. Now, in order to illustrate this, we want to refer to the breakfast table. We want to look at alphabets for just a minute. If you found a box of alphabets on your kitchen table, let's say you're a teenager, and it was spilled over, and you saw a message out of those pieces of cereal that said, take out the garbage, and Mom, I don't think that you would think that just happened. When the box fell over, all of a sudden this message comes forth. No, because a message always indicates intelligence. A message indicates intelligence, and that's something that, again, applies to what we're dealing with here because Mom is the intelligent one in that case, but then we come to this thing about the amoeba's DNA, and it is a message. In fact, any cell has DNA. You are full of DNA, and therefore there is a message that has been just put there by, I believe, God that helps our body to know how to function correctly. And so, looking at DNA for just a moment, again, remembering that any kind of message, any kind of communication indicates intelligence. We talked about the universe and some of the things pertaining to that, and design and preciseness and all of this kind of thing. Precision is a better word. And now we look at some of the things pertaining to just a single cell, like an amoeba. Notice the DNA's four-letter genetic alphabet. DNA of one human cell equals 5 million pages of information. Think about that. 25,200-page books. It's equivalent to that much information of the DNA in just one human cell. That's astounding and incredible and needs to be considered here. All of that is crammed into the nucleus of a cell, which is about 1/100th of the width of a human hair. And then you have about 100 trillion cells. So think about all of the information just in your human body. Remembering that information implies intelligence. It implies a message and therefore intelligence, and it's full. The DNA is a message. It is a four-letter alphabet indicating and communicating a message. Very important for us to remember this. In fact, it is equal, in one amoeba, it is equal to 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia. 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia. So first life requires an intelligent cause. It requires it for any logical, rational thinking person. It requires it because there's a message there. Just like that alphabets, the alphabet cereal, if it tipped over, you wouldn't expect the numbers to come into alignment in order to give a message. Same thing with DNA, and your human body is filled with cells that all have a message, each one equal to about 1,000 volumes of an encyclopedia. And you know what's incredible about that? Even Richard Dawkins, the renowned biologist and atheist, stated that in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. He states that the human cell contains that much information, and so it's not even coming from a Christian source, but he must admit that as well. Very important. Bill Gates said this concerning what is the source of the genetic code. He said this about DNA. DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. And so again, it's like a computer program. DNA. Who created, let's say, a computer program? Was it intelligence? Obviously, it was intelligence. It was created by a software expert, a software person who was educated in these kinds of things. And so why would we think that if DNA is like software, it's like a computer program, why would we think that that just happened? It just happened by chance, or it happened because of physical necessity. No, logically speaking, it must have happened because there was an intelligence behind it, and therefore God. Now, messages come from minds and not natural laws. And in this book, Signature of the Cell by Stephen Meyer, he said this: our uniform experience affirms that specified information, whether inscribed hieroglyphics, written in a book, encoded in a radio signal, or produced in a simulation experiment, always arises from an intelligent source, from a mind, and not a strictly material process. Now we come to a part of this now, and again, this is very complicated in many cases. There's so much to this. It's so big. I mean, there's just so much to this. We come to this thing called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity. And I'm just going to let you get a little bit of an idea what that means. What that means is that certain cells and the way they're made, they could not have been made gradually like Darwinian evolution would suggest, but they had to, in order to be alive, they had to have all the parts at the same time functioning. And so they had to appear at an instant, they had to appear all together with all their parts in order to live, in order for there to be life. And of course, this bacterial flagellum is oftentimes the one example that is given here. As you see, it's got a rotator, it's got many different parts. The width of an E. coli bacterium cell is 1/1000th of the width of a human hair. Again, line up 12,500 in 1 inch, if you will. 240 distinct proteins. Microscopic outboard motor on its tail. A microscopic outboard motor on its tail. If you see an outboard motor on a boat, do you think it just happened? Or do you think there was a designer to that outboard motor? Everything about experience tells us that if there's that kind of design, there must have been somebody that came up with the idea. And also going on with this, it runs at an incredible 100,000 RPMs. All right, so revolutions per minute, 100,000 revolutions per minute. Takes only a quarter turn to stop, shift directions, and start spinning 100,000 RPMs in the opposite direction. And irreducible complexity must have been created all at once, as I already mentioned to you. And so this is a fantastic argument, and a powerful argument again for design and for the existence of God, because if you look at anything like this, look at this bacterial flagellum, look at all the parts, the hook, the universal joint, it's got like a propeller, it's got bushings, an outer membrane, etc. It's got all these parts, a rotor. I mean, why would anyone think that this just happened by chance? It's got all, it points completely to an intelligent mind, an intelligent creator in this. And so again, anyone with an unbiased mind, anyone that doesn't have presuppositions and ideas, eliminating the idea of God to start with, has got to come to the conclusion, this is pointing to God. This is pointing to an intelligent creator. I don't think anybody with any unbiased mind would come up with any other answer but that. Now, atheist Richard Dawkins said this in his book, The God Delusion. Very interesting. He said this was the central argument of his book. And what was it? Appearance of design is overwhelming. There's no explanation for it in physics. Maybe the multi-universe theory, which relies on luck. And so here's a biologist, scientist, and he's saying, oh, it's all by luck that it happened. I don't want to get into the multi-universe idea, but it has the idea basically that, and again, they're just putting the problem out there further, that there's many universes and ours just happened to sustain life. But it was just by luck that ours happened to sustain life out of all the multi-universes out there. That's never been proven scientifically, and it's all speculation, trying to avoid the idea that there could be an intelligent creator behind all that we see in our universe. And then he says this: who made God? And as I already said to you, that's a ridiculous question, because who made God? Again, He is eternal. And so no one who is eternal requires someone to have made them, right? So it's a ridiculous statement. Now, atheist and biologist, again, Richard Dawkins said, living objects look designed. They look overwhelmingly as though they're designed. Biology is the study of complicated things which give the impression of having been designed for a purpose. But yet he's saying they only look it. They look designed, but you got to keep it in mind, they're really not designed. It just happened by luck, is what Dawkins is basically saying. Now, Anthony Flew was one time a big atheist and philosopher, and one who would debate some of the greatest Christian apologists that ever were. And Anthony Flew was known as one of the most intelligent atheists on planet Earth. But before he died, he did believe in God. Now, he didn't become a Christian as far as we know, but he did become a theist, or a believer in God. Notice what he said. He said, it seems to me that Richard Dawkins, the man we previously referred to, constantly overlooks the fact that Darwin himself, in the 14th chapter of The Origin of Species, pointed out that his whole argument began with a being which already possessed reproductive powers. This is the creature, the evolution of which is a truly comprehensive theory of evolution, must give some account. Darwin himself was well aware that he had not produced such an account. It now seems to me, note the last thing here, it now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. And really, the design argument and all of the evidence that he saw is what really got him to convert from being an atheist to a theist. And that caused quite an earthquake, if you will, amongst the scientific community. Fred Hoyle, an astronomer, his atheism was shaken by the Anthropic Principle. Remember, the Anthropic Principle means that it appears that all of the universe and all of the attributes of the earth, they all were meant to sustain human life. And he said this, he was shaken by this. Notice, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. And so even though Hoyle was vague about just who this super intellect is, he recognized that the fine-tuning of the universe requires an intelligence. That's what Geisler and Turek stated. And so he recognized that. He couldn't avoid it anymore. He had to see that and admit that as well. Cosmologist Frank Tipler said this concerning, again, the Anthropic Principle. He said, when I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that one day I would be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are in fact true, that these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics. And so forced in to come to this conclusion. Why? Because he sees the evidence. He follows the evidence where it leads. That's what we all need to do. Follow the evidence where it leads. Francis Crick, co-founder of DNA, or co-discoverer, we should say, of DNA, he said this: biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. What an amazing statement. He's saying that they need to always keep in mind, because everything points to the idea it was designed, but they got to keep in mind, no, it was not designed. Why? Because everything they're looking at, everything they're observing says it was. And so what an astounding statement from a scientist, basically saying ignore the fact that it looks designed. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the rest of the way they look at science for the most part. It's interesting. Philip Johnson said this, Berkeley law professor. He said, Darwinian biologists must keep repeating that reminder, the one we just quoted from Francis Crick. They must keep repeating that reminder themselves, because otherwise they might become conscious of the reality that is staring them in the face and trying to get their attention. And that reality is design is really there. And so this is remarkable. So, as we look at some of these things, remember this. What does the cosmological argument tell us? As we talked about that last time, we saw that God must be supernatural in nature. What's it tell us about God? He's supernatural. He's powerful, incredibly. He's eternal. He's omnipresent. We dealt with all this last time. Timeless and changeless, immaterial, personal. necessary for the rest of the universe to continue to function, etc. And then also infinite and singular, and finally diverse and yet with unity. So, what is the teleological argument? The argument for design. What does that add to our understanding of God? Well, it certainly tells us he must be intelligent, supremely intelligent, only cognitive being, only a cognitive being can produce cognitive being, and that he did, right? And then also he must be purposeful, as he deliberately created everything. And there's a purpose to everything he created. You know, a lot of people today are going through life and they don't feel like there's any purpose to life. They cannot find it, and so they suffer from depression and all sorts of things. But I want you to know that the universe was made with purpose. You were made with purpose, and therefore you can find your purpose by coming to the God who made everything with a purpose, and that is through the Lord Jesus Christ. It is through Jesus Christ and him alone that we come to God, and down the road we'll be establishing that he alone is the Savior of the world. So this has been the teleological argument in a nutshell. A lot of things involved with that. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Remember, there's notes that you can download and follow along with. And so until next time, when we'll deal with Lesson 5 and the moral argument, God bless you, and we'll see you then.